GM friends, and welcome to the future of gaming. You're listening to our weekly blockchain gaming rollup. We are recording this on Friday, the 19th of August, 2022. We've got Philip Collins, we've got Devin Becker, we've got myself, Nico Vereecke. Today we're talking about the Blocklords Mint. Devin also in the past week has built a game just to prove a point, casually. We're talking about the Matchbox Raise, Axie Origin economy updates, and Microsoft, who finally decides to touch Web3. As you can see, I have a slightly different background than usual. That's because I'm actually on my kind of honeymoon. I had my second wedding party last weekend, and now we're in Bordeaux. So I'm recording from here. Brought my mic and everything just to tell my wife and make it clear that she married a real nerd that wants to talk about games at 7 a.m. in the morning. So that's that. Let's talk about the news. So first thing, Blocklords Mint. I had a recording with David, who's Blocklords CEO, and I'm super excited about Blocklords as a game. I once did a post about how I could ever see a play and earn economy work, or a play to earn game work, where like a significant part of the player base earns like a significant amount of money, as in like more than $5 a day or something. And one of the ways that would work, in my opinion, would be asymmetric gameplay, where you have like different game loops within the same game. And so that's basically what Blocklords is doing. Blocklords is like this huge medieval, like fantasy style game where you have like lords, and then you have knights and raiders and farmers, and so different types of roles for different types of players. And so you can now pre-register to get like an NFT to actually like become a lord and start playing. So that's happening. I'm super excited about that game. It looks really cool, and it's a great team as well. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, we're not directly involved in Blocklords, but I can say that that's one of the coolest game concepts I think I've seen in Web3. I view it as like a persistent Age of Empires style game, and I think it's such an interesting dynamic with having these roles as part of a hierarchy, as part of a bigger game ecosystem. Definitely, I think one of those games that's kind of leading the charge from V0 to V1 of Web3 gaming. So definitely excited for that one. Very, very cool content.
It reminds me a lot of kind of the modern 4X games, like Rise of Kingdoms, which there was because Ryan Fu is a big, huge Rise of Kingdoms fan, so I played it with him a bit to get the kind of the idea. And then Delphi put out that sort of article or essay or whatever it was on Rise of Kingdoms, which had some pretty good detail as well. And it kind of highlights that same kind of idea of that sort of hierarchy, the political stuff. I did find the political side of the games pretty interesting, and I'm curious to see how that goes with when you start to make it more Web3. Technically, there's already one kind of like similar to those Rise of Kingdoms 4X style games that does have blockchain stuff, which is League of Kingdoms. So that's probably the closest thing we have leading up to Blocklords in terms of that. But they like League of Kingdoms has been like slowly dipping their toes. They started with land, but it was like this one minor thing, and then they've like slowly added more. But I think Blocklords is the first one just like jumping off the diving board straight in to like the NFT side of things. And I'm curious to see how feudalism works out in this new Web3 economy, and whether or not it's something we actually want, or if we're like, crap, what did we ask for here? But it relates interestingly to, and something we may also get to later, but something that Gabe Layden mentioned in his Spaces, Twitter Spaces rant, that I thought was particularly interesting and relevant to this, which was he was saying the misconception around the pay-to-win stuff is that whales are paying to be kind of killers, to dominate others. But his point was that they were paying mostly to be kings and judges, that they were paying to be the people that people come to for help, that they want to judge others and kind of rule over others. And that really seems kind of parallel to this idea of this hierarchy system. And it does sound like, whales probably, if I understood Blocklords correctly, will probably be pretty high up that feudal system, or lords or kings or whatever. And so maybe it will be a really good fit for 4X style whale players, and like the economy will asymmetrically, as you mentioned, match up with the fact that most players are kind of peasants and serfs, and most, and then the few, the mighty with the checkbook end up being the kings. And maybe that's what we'll get. I'm just really interested to see as an experiment, as the conversation that you had, Nico, previously with them was very fascinating in terms of their thought process on it.
Yeah, I think it's actually a trend that I've seen through a number of pitches where one thing that is not talked about as much as I might expect is the meta game that Web3 is opening up, where with some of these different systems and roles within an economy with a provable kind of rarity or a provable role within a broader ecosystem, there's almost this social element where a big portion of a lot of the games that I've seen actually have nothing to do with the digital interface of the game. And it's this entirely like mental, social, political side of moving forward in progression. So I think Blocklords is maybe one of the most well thought out examples I've seen, but it's definitely a trend that NFTs in general has kind of opened up over the last year or so.
100%. It reminds me of a conversation I had with David Amor. He's the CEO and co-founder of Playmint, building like fully on-chain games. He's part of VogDAO as well. And so I had a conversation with him. And so funny thing is about him is he built a game called Buzz, which is a music quiz, which a lot of people don't know about, but it was a ginormous hit in Belgium. And so like everyone I know, we used to play that game. And so like one of the things that he told me was, one of the things that I wanted to do with the game was I wanted to take some of the gameplay out of the game. And so, there are parts in that game where you have to decide who you're taking some points away from, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's like a timer, and then like I remember like at that moment you're like screaming to each other, right, in that room, because it's 1v1v, like it's 4 people playing against each other, and you're like screaming, no, don't take points from me, take points from them. I think a big part of what blockchain I think will do, and the best blockchain games will likely, a lot of that game will actually happen outside of get the games themselves, which could be like through other interfaces onto the blockchain or like within Discord, like political games, etc. And so
your
100%.
loot shirt is a good example of that.
Another one, man. It's the lootverse. We're all in the lootverse. Everything we do is part of the lootverse in some way. Yes. And then one also thing that I thought interesting, because Devin, when you were speaking, it sounded like you're always thinking of like player archetypes, as in like there's a player and there's a whale and there's a non-whale, etc. I feel like the way Blocklords is designing their game is also tailored around the play-to-earn gaming guilds, where you have this group of people that actually own assets which couldn't exist before the blockchain, or like in a very difficult way. And so this is also like something different, where every individual could be a farmer, but then together they're a lord, if that makes sense. And then together they make the major decisions.
I think you're assuming a lot more cooperation than might actually happen, too.
Dude, when there's money involved, people can work together, no?
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say, is I wonder how the financialization aspect of this works, because it does seem like an added layer of complexity to try to balance people progressing through genuine skill and dedication to a game versus just being able to spend their way to a top. So I think there's an interesting balance that you have to strike between your wallet speaking for your ability to progress and just genuinely putting in the time, effort, and showing off skill to get to that like king level versus being a peasant or farmer.
Well, there's already so much of that in things like Rise of Kingdoms, where like there's this competition to that. Like just talking to Ryan about it before, like just the amount of betrayal and other behind the scenes things that happens. Like I got to peek into some of the chats because he would actually run as a king, and like I actually get to see like some of the conversations that happens and the betrayal, the reputations. It's like this Game of Thrones kind of thing going on. And I imagine when it's even more financialized with NFTs and stuff like that, it's going to get even crazier. And I look forward to seeing. I hope we get Eve style things coming out of this, right? Where like Eve is sometimes more fun to read about than it is to play because of the big, huge betrayals and other things like that. So I hope a Blocklords kind of takes a page from Eve there.
100%. Good. Next point. So do we not want to touch a bit more about Layden? What's his first name?
Sure. Yeah, like I think he. So for people who aren't aware, he's the guy who founded Machine Zone, did Game of War Fire Age, which was insane and created kind of the big 4X genre, and then made a couple of hits after that as well. But that's the one that and Mobile Strike are the ones people probably know him for the most because of all the marketing and all the other stuff. And also was involved in America's Army, I guess, before that. So dude's been around for a while, and he kind of, I guess, had retired essentially from game development, and then just got so excited by Web3 he came back, and then started a company called Limit Break. And I guess they've been working for about a year according to what he said on the Twitter space that he did recently, and I think it was the 15th. But it was a pretty interesting conversation where he was really kind of digging into like a lot about his motivations, the way he thinks about Web3, and the biggest claim, of course, which was that free to play is just dead, and then anyone's doing it is like a dinosaur now. Like he was talking about it the way like mobile game developers maybe were talking about Facebook Canvas and stuff like that. But he has the pedigree going back to like having done MySpace apps and stuff. So like he's seen kind of the things. But his point was like that Web3 will be 10x to free to play what free to play was to consoles. And big claims, but the dude's like trying to put his money where his mouth is, and like as he says like about 100 times in the spaces, he intends to be the number one game and the game that everyone in the world plays. So we'll see if he can make it happen. But he did put out some NFTs, an NFT collection that I think supposedly did pretty well. Wasn't exactly to my taste in terms of what kind of NFT I would buy, but it seemed to do quite well. And I'm really curious to see what Limerick Break is going to do, because I don't think he's just going to like take 4X and bring it over, right? I think he's got new ideas around what you could do in Web3. A lot of stuff. And I think the other surprise for me was him just admitting that like he didn't like the adversarial nature of free to play in terms of like kind of working against players, and he's happy to be a lot more aligned now with communities and with players and really building in a way that like just makes everyone excited, which I think is really cool, because we tend to have this view of free to play developers that is kind of adversarial, and seeing them actually genuinely actually have a heart after all, and he's got a soul, what because you see something like Game Over, Fire Engine, you're just like, these dudes are insanely greedy, like whatever, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Did he mention why he thought that free to play was gonna die? Like,
yeah,
what
he just
exactly?
Just the because Web3 was just that good, right? Like that it was that big of a difference that and we've heard it a few times where people say like in the future here, people are going to be like scoffing if a game doesn't let you own your stuff. Those kinds of things where it's like we're going to really like shift the mindset of people so much that people are just going to be like, free to play is dumb. Like, I can't believe I ever played that kind of mentality. The way maybe, like I said, maybe we look at like Farmville on Facebook Canvas or something and just be like, I played that at one point? Oh, geez, what was I thinking? Like, I think it's that kind of mentality shift. That, and I think he has kind of pointed out, he thinks the money is just going to be like crazy bigger. Like, he made one really interesting point as well that I wasn't aware of, which is that Apple does have a limit on in-app purchases to where a single purchase can only be $100 max. And his point was like, he's like, good luck finding even an NFT that's like $100 or less. Like, the money in NFTs and stuff like that, of course, in theory, right, we maybe coming out of the other side of a crypto winter, it won't be necessarily as crazy, but I do think there is maybe the potential for a lot more money in Web3, because of the idea of ownership means that like when you buy something and you spend crazy money, there is the potential for return on that, either through profit or just actually being able to cash out when you're done playing, stuff like that.
Yeah. And I mean, on the mobile side too, there's a lot of legislation in the US that's being pushed right now around opening up these marketplaces. And I think that's just going to continue to extend the possibility that he's referring to around unlocking whales even further than they're currently being reached. But yeah, I mean, really? To your point on the free to play stuff, it is one of like the great ironies of blockchain gaming in its current form, where everyone talks about how, at least everyone on the opposition side talks about how predatory it feels and how scammy it feels. And it's like, that's kind of the definition of free to play. Like, it has to be predatory. Like, they are milking dollars out of your attention. And even trying to coerce you to pay in ways that you might not have expected you wanted to. But like, it is by definition almost like preying on an audience, because that's just the model that it is. It's a
very ethical gray area, because you can look at it as a way of like, well, they're letting all these people play for free and they're just taking the rich players and like dispersing it in this communist sort of way. Like, you can look at it in so many different ways. That's why it's like such a gray area ethically, and an interesting one. And I think it is nice to see that people treat Web3 as like maybe a potential like antithesis of that to some extent. I mean, we'll see, right? Like, it's still pretty new, and maybe we'll see some extra evil stuff that somehow is far worse than the idea of milking whales. But
yeah, and I don't even know if it's like ethically gray area. I just think it's like, it's a business model and it's worked for a lot of people, and so they're going to continue pursuing it. And I mean, like, predatory is a very strong word for it.
Yeah,
and
we need to stop using
obviously,
that term.
there's a spectrum. There's a spectrum for being predatory, but I mean, I just think it's kind of funny sometimes when like people that really hate Web3 games because they're predatory are playing games that are arguably 10x more predatory than anything they could find in the Web3 world right now.
Exactly, like people messing with loot boxes and stuff in these other games and then complaining about free to play, and it's like, but I don't know. Like I personally am a huge fan of free to play because I don't play games for very often, and I don't want to buy games just to try them for like a small period of time. And I'm also somewhat of a mid-core spender. Like if I like a game a lot, I will spend, not like crazy amounts, but I will spend if there's stuff that I want to get in it. And I don't feel ashamed doing so because it's like I don't feel like I'm being manipulated. But I also, I guess I have a high opinion of myself and my will that I can resist manipulative tactics, which probably is not true. It's a very Dunning-Kruger effect, I guess. But it doesn't feel too predatory to me because I just feel like, well, I've got self-restraint. Like I can pay for the stuff that I want to pay for and like enjoy the game, and I get to try all these games for free and just pay for the ones that I like and for the things that I like, which was supposed to be the original pitch of free to play. And I think for some people, at least like myself, it still rings true.
Mm-hmm. I do hope Gabe is right, and obviously like I can't push back on him too hard here. He's a legendary game producer, but I think the inflammatory language is a little bit risky in the sense that it almost makes people dig in their heels even further just for the sake of, I'm on the other side, you're getting aggressive at my position now, and so now I just want to see you lose for another reason.
Judging by his tweets, I think that's the reaction he's going for. Like he's gone for some throats.
It's interesting, but I hope he's right. Because it definitely is not bringing the other side over until he shows, and I'm sure he's pursuing action versus just words, but we'll have to see what happens.
I hope he's right for the sake of this being the future of gaming podcast and being the topic we're talking about the most. I hope so, right? Otherwise, we're picking the wrong future timeline here.
Guys, this is the internet, so it doesn't matter if he's right because we're talking about him now, so he already did his job, right? So
yeah, true.
He understands the internet. That
he's good at marketing.
He has that going for him. Yeah. Good. All right. Awesome. The next topic is the Matchbox Raise. I've actually already mentioned Matchbox a few times over the last months. So Matchbox.
I still keep thinking you're talking about the cars. Every time
you mean, what cars?
The Matchbox cars, like the little, like Hot Wheels, those kind of like little die-cast metal cars. You're not familiar? Or maybe it's a US thing.
We're on the internet. We talk about digital games.
Hey, Hot Wheels has NFTs, man.
Oh shit. Yeah, that's true. I haven't got those for a reason. Anyway, so MatchboxDAO is an ecosystem fund for games built on StarkNet. So StarkNet is developed by the company Starkware, who has built the technology which Immutable uses, which Sorare uses, and it's a way to like scale the blockchain. Essentially, it's like layer 2 on Ethereum based on ZK, zero knowledge technology. And so StarkNet is going to be their open public blockchain. It's like you would have Polygon, but then they would have StarkNet, where you can like bridge assets over, and like once you're in on that chain, things are just way cheaper and easier and faster. So they're building that, and so MatchboxDAO is an ecosystem fund, aiming at bringing forward, gaming on that chain. And we already talked about it a bunch. It's interesting because one, what can you do with a blockchain once it's like way more scalable, which StarkNet, because they're using ZK technology, is. So, I mean, the cost of transactions can go down by like a factor of 20,000, I believe, something crazy. And, so they have that, which is faster and cheaper transactions. But then the other thing is also they have ZK technology. So essentially you can actually build games. Like you can build poker on chain, which is like everyone's cards are on the chain, but only your cards. And then once you once the game ends, you show your cards, and then it's other people's cards as well on the chain, which before that was impossible. And I know that a lot of people are like, you can never build good games on chain because you can always see everything that's happening, and now there's actual proof that doesn't need to be that way. Anyway, so they raised, I believe, 7.5 million. I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, so solid raise, and I'm excited what's going to be coming out of that.
Definitely.
It's probably going to take a while though. It feels like it's still pretty early stage. This technology is so I can attest to that. Starknet was supposed to be further along than it is, so it's taking a bit longer. And so I know some teams who are building on there that are being held behind by the technology that they're actually building on. And so I think before we see, like, I think initially we'll see like small proof of concepts, right? Like poker on chain. And there's some other stuff they're doing as well, like an NFT as a trainable AI. So basically, like, there's this entity on the blockchain that you can go train, and then theoretically, if there's actually some value being created by you training that AI, you'd be able to like train to earn an NFT on the chain. Anyway, that's all random stuff that could be cool at some point. But
yeah, Nico, for those teams that feel like they're being held back a little bit by the slower development, do you think that there's a feeling of almost like regret, or do you think there's a feeling of, hey, this is the best future technology, so when it's eventually ready, we'll be kind of at the forefront of what's possible?
I think there's a mixed feel. I know two teams I know a bunch of teams, one of which decided to go, okay, we're going to stick with Starkware and Starknet. And another one who said, look, it's clearly not going to be, done fast enough for us to build actually a good game. So we're going to... Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so and they're gonna and so we're gonna, what was it? We are going to switch to another chain for the time being, and if we can, like, go back. So there's different things being done there.
I mean, that's like a lot of people switched off Ethereum even to ZK stuff like Gods Unchained. That was originally on Ethereum, and then like had to switch off to their own thing that created Immutable, which was using Stark tech, I believe. I know it's ZK stuff. I think it might be Starkware related stuff. And so, like, that's a pretty common thing we're seeing. Like, people try and scale up, realize it maybe doesn't do what they need to do, and then switch off to doing like whatever kind of compromise they need to do, or even just push the technology more forward in terms of like switching off to something that maybe is a little early. But I think it's like a trade-off when you're an early adopter in a lot of this tech, where it can either like be a huge pain and like costly and hurt, and like sometimes you can just then all of a sudden be a big mover because of it, or sometimes it could be like, well, we did all that work so other people could benefit at the end by being the second adopter. It happens like both ways, right? Although second adopter has to be better at marketing generally.
All right, so yeah, Matchbox and Starknet. We'll see how that plays out. I think when it comes to this super new technologies, like, it's way out there. If you look back at what people were saying about rollup or like scaling solutions for Ethereum, initially it was all going to be optimistic rollups, and ZK rollups or knowledge rollups were a bit more out, and they're actually like skipping the optimistic rollup stage, and they're immediately going for the ZK rollups, and everyone's very excited about it. But it seems like there's still a lot of stuff to be figured out and a lot of work to do. I know that the Starkware CEO is hiring engineers like crazy still looking. So yeah, clearly it's not done yet, and there's still some work to do.
Building the future takes a lot of engineers. Okay, at least we might have the merge next month for Ethereum. So like, at least we're getting potentially some upgrades basically to our tech as things go. So. Baby steps, and then big leaps, and then baby steps again, back and forth.
100%.
Basically. Good.
All right, Devin, do you want to talk us through the reason why you built a game over the past week?
Yeah. So, and we talked about this on the last episode too of the podcast, where we had the conversation about interoperability and ownership and all that kind of stuff, and I felt like that conversation was getting to a point where it was like. Too theoretical, right? Like, too many people talking about like stuff that's like possibly true, possibly not true, but it was very opinion oriented, and like, that's cool for like theoretical armchair conversation kind of thing. But I was like, we're trying to push technology forward and games forward and stuff. So let's actually like, take these ideas for a test drive instead of just thinking about them. And so like I had, so I work with the Crypto Raiders team pretty regularly on a consulting basis, and I had, just for fun, because like we talked about some interoperability ideas and random stuff, just like off the cuff with that team, and I decided one day, just for fun, like I whipped up a prototype of like I'd been playing like Vampire Survivors and those kind of games, and I had made some of those kind of games actually a long time ago, and so like I was pretty familiar with developing that stuff really quickly, and so like I threw together like half as a joke a prototype where I just took art assets from Crypto Raiders and made and sound assets as well, and made like a little Vampire Survivors kind of game, and that was a few weeks back, and then because that conversation came up, and I was like, you know what? Let's actually prove like what interoperability would be like with this. And so I decided to just go for it with that prototype and just say like, well, I have some time today, it was on Saturday, and just bang something out as quick as I could in terms of demonstrating the different kind of parts of interoperability. Like that conversation we had with the kind of broken down magic card sort of thing. I wanted to kind of like demonstrate the different levels of that and so on. So we could actually then talk about that afterwards and have something we can literally point to. And you could go like, that's BS what you did is interoperability, whatever. But we're pointing at a real thing and then talking about a real thing instead of just words about words. And so it's not like the greatest example of interoperability or anything like that. But basically I wanted to show like there's some different kind of approaches to how that works. And so what I did is, to be clear, I did use the art assets still from the game, whereas I want to also make it clear that I could have also not. I could have hand-drawn some stuff and gone a different route, like if I didn't have permission to use the art. In this case, because I work with the team, it was like not a big deal. But I also could have gone the other way. So the art asset stuff itself gets sometimes ends up too much of the conversation, where you're talking about IP law and all these other things. But interoperability doesn't have to mean art or sound assets are transferred over. So just to be clear, before anyone reads the article that hasn't already, like that's not the important part. The important part is, reading the data of an NFT and then doing something with that in a game. And to be fair, I did cheat a little bit because I didn't feel like dealing with alchemy in terms of my time crunch. I didn't want to do the actual wallet reading. So I kind of skipped over the part where I had to read directly from the wallet in real time. And I just took the JSON data that would be in the metadata of my actual Raider. Like I took my actual Raider, I took the data from it that you would actually get if you were to read my wallet. So in theory, I just skipped the part of the step that was not important to the actual project, because reading wallets, I don't want to say it's trivial, but it's a very repeatable process that is not necessarily like the point of interoperability in terms of like the tech, right? And so then I took that and I just read the data from it and said, okay, first off, I could implement the name of my character, right? Like that's easy. I'll display the name. And then it's like, okay, well then what else can I take? I can take stats about this character, right? Well, I've got 6 different attributes as a typical role-playing game. And the part I wanted to demonstrate with that was that this idea that you don't have to take things over exactly as they are, right? Like Crypto Raiders works one way, right? Like it's got the stats and they affect combat in this very complicated way, and combat is this certain turn-oriented thing. And I was building a very different type of game, right? It's this Vampire Survivors game. It's got its own thing. And so I took each of those stats and I seriously spent maybe 10, 20 minutes total combined time of coming up with what to do with those stats and implementing it to prove the point that like the idea of implementing data from another game in your game doesn't have to be the super complicated thing. Now, obviously, every situation is different, right? This wasn't meant to be purely representative of every situation and what you should do for your game. But it was like, hey, I could literally take each of these 6 stats, find unique ways to implement each of them that makes sense for what that stat represents in Crypto Raiders in a way that makes sense in this game too, and demonstrate that process so that like it affects your ability to play the game like better by bringing it over. And it was also to demonstrate this idea that that vampire texts don't have to be vampire texts, that they could be symbiotic too. So this idea that like what you do in Crypto Raiders actually does have an effect in the game that I made, because the higher you level up your character, I even took it to so that the gear that you had, the way it works in Crypto Raiders is it affects those same 6 stats. So I did the same thing. I took all the gear that you had, even the gear that I didn't display, and I took its stats and I applied those as well. And so you can actually, like, as you level up your Crypto Raiders character, if I was in theory reading from the wallet, it would actually affect your character in this game. And so it showed that idea that there can be a symbiotic relationship, because if you want to like have a better head start in this Survivors game, you can go play Crypto Raiders and give yourself more stats and more gear. And so this idea, it doesn't have to be straight parasitic interoperability. It can be like cooperative, symbiotic interoperability.
Should we continue with Adam for a bit? I think we'll have to.
I think so. I was giving him a second to see if he came back, but I think we lost him for a bit.
Yep, definitely got rugged. Anyway, so would you want, before we continue about that, you want to touch upon Microsoft and their first steps, baby steps into Web3?
Yeah, so I think this is a theme that we've been talking about for a while now with big brands taking baby steps into Web3 gaming and how they're approaching it. And so I thought an interesting news story over the last couple of weeks, I think it's a little over a week old now, was Microsoft giving a grant to a space-themed shooter called StarHeroes. And obviously, a lot of listeners probably never heard of StarHeroes. I hadn't heard of StarHeroes before this announcement, to be completely honest. And I think it shows that a lot of these big brands, and we've talked about this with Supercell in the past, for example, they want to do something because the cost of missing out on blockchain gaming, if it turns into the segment of gaming that a lot of people think of it as, the cost of missing out is so high that you can't do nothing, but you also don't want to put your most prestigious IPs at risk. And so I think we're going to see a lot more of these like small grants or small roll-ups and basically being test cases for these brands. And so, you know, nothing too new there, but more of just like a continuation of this narrative we've been talking about of how are the big players going to get involved. It seems to be that the answer today is in very, very small ways over time in incremental progress.
And
what I want to know is how involved they're going to be. What's that?
I was asking, what are the details of this exact like raise or grant?
I actually don't know the size of the grant. I think a big thing was that they were getting access to Azure PlayFab. So a pretty powerful toolkit that isn't necessarily just readily available for everyone. And so I think that was one of the highlights of it, was it was kind of entering a different class through this grant, in addition to just the capital and the brand being associated with the IP.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah,
I want
to see how involved these companies end up being. What's that? Yeah, my internet's been really bad like all week. It's made it hard to even do work half the time because I don't know why. Just on my desktop, I don't know. It's the point where I might as well just tether over my phone again. Sometimes internet, man. I'm not sure where it cut me off either.
Doesn't matter. We can go back into that, but you were going to ask something or say something.
Yeah, like I just want to know how involved these companies end up being, right? Because it's like, so what's the net benefit of throwing money at these things? If like chances are most of these things aren't going to make them a ton of profit, right? Like it's like the Supercell's investment or this one or some of these other ones where it's like, I get that you're like kind of experimenting, but it's like, what are you hoping to get out of it as a big company, right? Like you could already watch from afar anyone else's experiment. Like, so you don't get, you don't necessarily get any extra visibility except for maybe some behind the scenes. But I think as it is already, like Web3 is pretty transparent with a lot of people. So like, I don't think you're getting extra benefit there. So I do wonder like how involved these companies are getting with the actual projects in terms of like, are they getting to like gain some knowledge and experience from these people? Are they looking to possibly poach teams later on if it works out by having some of that seed money planted in there? Like, I want to know what they're looking to get out of it because it's not always obvious. Like, just putting money into it, these don't seem like investments in the traditional like financial sense to me.
Well, that's pretty common with corporate VC in general. A lot of the times where return is part of the decision, but also they're a lot less price sensitive because a lot of times investments are almost like teeing up the optionality of an acquisition in the future. Yeah. I think in blockchain gaming, who knows, maybe the motivation is we can acquire some of the IP if it really takes off. Otherwise, maybe it is, let's just like figure out what's actually happening in the background here and get a little bit of exposure. But I do think it fits the traditional kind of ethos of corporate VC, which is not, hey, let's get in early and maximize the return on this investment. It's let's get in early and see what we can do with this thing at some undetermined date in the future.
It also makes shareholders happy as an added benefit, and maybe the only benefit for now.
That's a good point. Yeah, the shareholder point of view is definitely usually important to that, and they're just like the way everyone wanted to hear metaverse on everything for a while. Like I could see that point of view. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good. So, Devin, we lost you when you were talking about the vampire attack and the more the symbiosis that's possible there. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you guys missed too much. It cut me off kind of somewhat where I was at. But yeah, the idea that things don't have to be so aggressive with user acquisition and stuff like that. The games can find ways to work together, because I find that like in that conversation about interoperability, like there's 2 points of views, like the point of view of like the vampire tech side of things, where it's like this malicious thing, and there's the point of view of like why would I want to do the work to incorporate someone else's NFT, right? Like, so in the game thing that I made is like, why would I do all this to incorporate Crypto Raiders NFT? And it's like, well, I could also then make my own NFTs or tokens or whatever as part of the game that I made, and then be able to financially benefit from people coming over from Crypto Raiders, but also Crypto Raiders benefits from me sending people over, because the idea is like you separate enough of the systems. So like one of the examples I tried to make in there was like, I didn't like, because characters in Crypto Raiders also have XP amounts and levels, and so does the Survivor game that I made, but I purposely didn't tie those two things together to have some separation, to have progress arcs and stuff like that. So it's like the stats you bring over can help you get a little bit of a head start in terms of like being boosted up a little bit, but they don't replace the gameplay. And I think that was part of my point that maybe I didn't even emphasize enough, was that like this purpose of like the symbiotic relationship where you separate out enough elements and overlap enough elements that everyone kind of like can do their own thing. Like you could just come over and play the Survivors thing without having an NFT. You could play the Crypto Raiders thing without having anything to do with Survivors, or you could play them both and get some cross benefit in a way that like they each their own game, but they help each other. And like obviously like I didn't have anything going back either to Crypto Raiders, but I could, right? I could have something that I make in there that Crypto Raiders could then incorporate into their game in a similar fashion. And I think these games can work together. We saw, like, for the example, the Millions on Mars thing with Sunflower Farms or Sunflower Lands, showing a symbiotic relationship where they work together and enable different things, cross marketing. Like, I think there's a lot more future than people want to kind of admit. People are kind of taking very polarized points of view on interoperability and synergy and IP and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's a very Web 2, I guess, point of view. Like, I think there's some opportunity for some really unique things to happen, but I don't expect them all to become the norm, right? Like, not every game's going to do interoperability. It doesn't make sense for every game to do everything, but I think I hope I demonstrated at least some of the potential ideas and implementations, and, like, use that as an example, whether you're pro or a con against interoperability. At least you have something you can point to, because I don't know of a lot of real world examples that we can even point to right now, because unless you count something like the was it Galaxy Fight Club or something like that, the one that's like the I don't think any of that's out yet, though, so I don't think you can even point to that yet.
Mm-hmm. I like the way you're thinking about this. It seems that especially traditional game makers are like, for them, interoperability means you like literally take an asset from one game and port it into the next, instead of
right.
And I think maybe the word is bad for this, but so the
well,
way
that's why I use the word portability.
Yes.
Specifically, I define that right at the beginning of the article. Is like, we're calling that portability, and then we're throwing that out the window, and we're moving on to stuff that actually makes sense, basically.
Well, and maybe the difference too is a lot of the use cases of interoperability I've seen so far have almost been their own closed loop systems, where one company is managing 5, 10, 20 games,
right.
and the assets are created with those games in mind, and so they are truly interoperable across this ecosystem. I think, to your point, what we're more likely to see is portability for external sources, where these assets can maybe be moved over, but they're going to function very differently. And maybe that's like the difference that I've seen, at least to date. And I mean, I think the latter is probably the more compelling side.
We should just accept that they could act differently and then move forward from there and go like, well, what does that mean? What can we do with that then? Instead of looking at it as like this weird compromise, it's like, that's actually a creative opening. Like, if I wanted to incorporate loot into that Survivors thing too, I could, and decide how it makes sense to that game. And this idea that, like, loot was a great example of demonstrating that flexibility. And we talked a little bit about that last episode as well, about that idea of like having some ambiguity being helpful. But even if there isn't, like, if I just wanted to take like axes and throw them in as like monsters you could fight, or monsters that fight with you as pets or whatever, like, could do that, right? And if I didn't use axes art, like, I don't think there's anything they can do to stop me. Like, I could just incorporate them, and if I don't, like, as long as I don't use any of their IP. And that's the thing, is it's like, it doesn't have to be about IP. So let's, like, maybe focus on what it can be about, instead of just like getting mired down in international, intellectual property law.
Yeah, the way I would I used to describe, and I still describe actually, what the blockchain brings to games or to assets is more like, I see the blockchain as a public database more than a centralized database, where you literally have this, open. I called it like it's a wall, and everyone has their little, it's like a little post box. Everyone has their post box, and everyone has a bunch of stuff in that post box. And so you can go to anyone and tell them, look what I have in my post box. And so, for me, the word interoperability and maybe even portability means you're actually like moving shit around, which essentially is not the case, right? You go into a game and you're like, oh, connect wallet, and then the game knows, oh, this player has these, and these items. And so in the end, it's all about, proving the ownership, like, in a decentralized way, proving the ownership of an asset. And then the game, depending on what assets you have, being able to do something special for you. In the end, it's not much more than that. And, I think trying to understand it in a way that, you need to be able to take assets from one game to another, and then these assets will work in each game, and the effect, like what you do with an asset in one game will influence how it acts in another game. I think is possible, but it's just like, I guess, the top surface layer where there's a shit ton more stuff you can do with this. A lot of stuff we don't yet understand.
Mm-hmm.
Good. I see Devin is frozen on my screen again, so we might have lost him. I think, with some of the technical hiccups here, we're also at time, I feel. So, let's call it an episode. And so that's good. Devin, if you can hear me, thank you, sir. You did a great job again. Phil, thank you as well. This was a fun one. I am going to go enjoy Bordeaux. Actually, I haven't drank a lot of wine yet. I'm not a wine man. I'm more of a beer man. So, that's that. Oh, we have Devin back.
I'm pulling a Nico today.
Good. All right, friends. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed it, let us know. Join the Discord to have more of these conversations that might spark Devin to build an actual game, which is kind of what happened. Let's speak to you. Last thing. We are next week is going to be Gamescom, and we're doing we're doing something there. Go to the meetup channel in our Discord if you want to join, and we can hang out and have some fun. And Phil and Devin are never at any conferences, so it's just going to be me and some of our other friends.
We met up at GDC. Come on now.
Oh, we did. That's true. Good. All right.
Also, make sure to check out the blog post we put out for those of you who weren't aware that we did that.
Yes.
Who just listened to the podcast.
Yes. We are actually starting to write stuff. Phil, maybe you can do like 1 minute about intro about what we wrote about the first blog post.
Yeah, so the first blog post was about analyzing communities and why it's challenged today, what metrics are being used, and how that's going to evolve over time. Really interesting first piece. Definitely go ahead and take a look at it if you haven't yet. It's on all of our socials. It's in the Discord. But definitely more of those to come. We'd love to get more perspectives from the community out there. I think there's been a lot of interesting conversation happening, and solidifying those thoughts and having multiple people read through them and edit is, I think, going to create some pretty interesting content over the next few months.
100%. And if you feel like you want to share something, and that could be written content, but also, this podcast is becoming a platform that we want others to have access to as well. So if you want to do something, reach out, and we can definitely help you set something up. All right, good. That was it. Have a great weekend, everyone, and speak to you next week. Ciao.